Look, I have very little money to leave my two children. There is, if I die quite soon after quitting work, there might be a little bit of an investment, and there will be the house, which isn't worth much, so they might get a penny each or so. But I'm one of those people who wants to spend their last cent 5 seconds before they drop dead of some unexplained ailment. So the next topic that I'm discussing is not something that applies to me. My father died in 1988, and he didn't leave much for my mother. And when my mother died, she didn't leave much for myself and my two siblings. I think we each got 1,335 rand each. Well, I've already said each. I think we each got 1,335 out of her estate. So not much of an estate it was. But I do sometimes wonder about people who do have money to leave their children, and for tax purposes, for the benefit of the children, for their emotional development, for their ability to stand on their own 2 feet, all of those things. I've read so many books about children who have been spoiled too early and it does them no good at all, and then children who could have benefited from an early inheritance and they didn't get it and it held back their development. Kenny Meiring is an independent financial advisor, writes about these sorts of things for Daily Maverick, and joins us now via Zoom. Hello, Kenny.
Hi, good afternoon, John.
Is there an overall rule? Keep your money till you die and leave it up to the master of the court to take 25 years to sort it all out. But let's assume there's an efficient system. Is there an overall sort of rule of thumb with try and give some before and some when you go, and or what?
Well, yeah, the rule of thumb is really is should you pass away and you've got an estate that's worth more than 7 million rand, um, the receiver of revenue is going to be taking a big chunk of that 20% or 25%, depending on how large your estate is, in the form of estate duty. And if you do have a situation where some of your children may be needing some money ahead of time, um, if you are convinced that you've actually got more than enough to live on, because that's the other mistake that people make is, 1 in 10 of us is going to live to 100. So you don't want to take a chance and give away a whole chunk of your assets while you are still able and young, and then you live to 80, and then you have to go into frail care where it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. If you have more assets than you need, a case can be made for donating assets to the children. But I always say the way you go about doing this is you've actually got to do it in a considered way. So number one, check that you have more than enough money to live on for the rest of your life. And then the second one is structure the donation to the children in such a way that you do not pay an excessive amount of donations tax.
How easy is the second to get right?
Well, the second to get right, there are a couple of ways in which you're going to be doing it, because the donations tax is levied at the same rate as the state duty. So 20% is what you would pay in donations tax, and 20% is what you have in the state duty. So you can pass that money straight across to your children and pay the 20% state duty ahead of time effectively. But there's also other ways of doing it, because in the last budget, each person is allowed to donate 150,000 rand a year. So if you're a couple, you and your spouse can actually donate 300,000 rand to your child, and that could certainly help them out of a hole if they happen to be in such a hole. But there's also
I
something to
mean,
be,
if
yeah.
you're lucky enough to have more than enough money to take you until your likely death date, and you can give them three. You've got two kids. Can you give each one 300,000 between you and your partner, or is that the total sum?
No, that would be the total sum. So the total of your donations in a year as an individual would be 150,000. So
Okay,
you can give
but
a chunk to each person.
yeah,
Yeah.
but you could give 300,000 to child number one this year, 300,000 to child number two the next year, 300,000 rand to child number one, and sort of repeat that ad infinitum until you feel
Yes.
that you've helped them enough.
Yeah. But there are also things you need to watch out for. So if you're busy doing something like this and you're helping the one child out, you need to also document it in your will, or in your letter of wishes surrounding your will, so that the other children are fully aware of this is what has happened, and that there's no sense of, they've been treated unfairly or someone's been favored, because, usually when there is a death, the nasty side of families does come to the fore. So it often helps just to document your rationale behind doing certain things. And you can also make allowances for that. The fact you've given some child the inheritance ahead of time, that is why it's actually happened.
Okay, and working out whether you've got enough to live on for yourself, because 1 in 10, really. That's the statistic that you said, Kenny, that 1 in 10 of us.
That 1 in 10, and I mean, I'm interacting with a lot of people through the Daily Maverick, and a lot of retired people, because I do a lot of work in this space, and the number of people who are going strong in their 90s, I'm amazed by it, and they're still vigorous and engaged and doing lots of things. So people are living longer. Just what happens is your health starts to fail, and it becomes quite costly towards the end.
Yeah, somebody has just messaged me to say, wow, just yesterday I gave my kids all the money I have, because why wait until I'm dead? They can use it now with the difficulty of current home buying. Well, if you gave your kids all your money, what are you going to live on? There's the other question that Kenny said is very important. And somebody else asked about, doing it in a different way. I mean, if you buy a house in their name, the state knows about that, and that becomes tax complicated as well, does it? I mean, are there other ways of helping out your children if you're lucky enough to have the money to do that?
Certainly, one of the things that I recommend is that if you do have more than enough money and you're wanting to help a child with a house, what you can do is you can actually make them a loan of whatever that bond is that they would be paying back for the loan. And you can actually make sure that if you just charge them a nominal interest rate of the repo rate plus 1%, that won't be seen as a soft loan. And then every year you and your spouse can forgive 300,000 Rand of that loan. So you can actually transfer an asset across to the children over time without triggering donations tax.
Would it be a good idea to create a family trust or a unit trust so that there is no transfer duty or loss of value, is a question from a listener.
Trusts can actually be very expensive to run, so I'm not a great fan of them unless you actually have an insane amount of money. I just think there are a couple of other ways in which you can do the things with fairly do it a lot cheaper, and just by thinking of the process through and the tax laws through cleverly, you can actually do it fairly easily.
Would it be smart to put a house in a trust?
The problem by actually having a house in a trust is that you will lose that primary rebate when you sell it, when it comes to capital gains tax. And the tax rates for trusts are significantly higher than for individuals. So I'm not a great fan of putting property into a trust unless you are setting up a structure where you're wanting to have a series of rental properties and use it as a business, and then I would actually put that trust into a company. So there are a number of ways in which you can do that. But for regular folk, all those loopholes that we used to have in the 90s, those have all been closed down. So I would rather just try and keep things as simple as possible, and just try and find some.
And there we have Kenny gone again. Okay, I think we've pretty much, we didn't go into, and he's a financial coach, he's not a psychologist, so it's probably correct not to go into it, but the implications for your child's, I suppose it depends how old, and your child will, one hopes that parents know their children. Is this kind of help going to be good for my child, or is this help going to make the child think that they can always come to mom and dad, that the wallet will always be open? I suppose that has a lot to do with the parent and the child.